Penn State fans, I don't know about you, but it feels like it's kind of an important week for James Franklin and his Penn State football program as we count down the hours, minutes, and seconds towards Saturday night, September 27th, Oregon, 7:30 primetime, NBC whiteout. I'm here with Max Ralph. Just heard from James Franklin, a James Franklin coach team that is coming off the bye. James talked about everything under the sun. He talked about those Oregon Ducks who beat them last year in the Big Ten title game. He talked about some things that his team needs to work on. He talked about some true freshmen. He talked about Max Ralph's question about, hey, have you guys kind of been sitting on some stuff on offense and not being any? Are you guys playing possum? I'm just paraphrasing. And he also talked a little bit about Kaytron Allen. And I think that's all of those things are good stuff, Max, that we're going to get into, starting with you and your Chicago Bears, who just put it on my Dallas Cowboys, who just continue to confound, amaze, and all in bad ways. We're 1-2, not feeling good about it. Max, I think you're 1-2, but feeling better about it. So how you been?
Well, I did get a nice confidence boost over the weekend. It was wonderful to see Mr. Caleb Williams sling it a little bit against the Cowboys. And so, yeah, that was great. The Bears should be 2-1 because they had that game against the Vikings in the bag. But, Bob, you and I both, we said it. We had wonderful bye weeks. I had a great morning this morning. Did a little special podcast with the Oregon Live people.
Yeah.
Mr. Aaron Fentress. So there will be an extra podcast this week from us that you should check out.
Yep.
Great conversation. Learned a lot about the Ducks, and it's whiteout week. What more could you ask for, Bob?
I have a feeling, even though Penn State's stadium renovation has tightened things up a little bit, and maybe some of the seats aren't necessarily early on in the season were not necessarily filled, I have a funny feeling by the time kickoff comes on Saturday, we're probably going to be looking at a crowd that'll be ready to rock and roll, but also a top five at the very least. Beaver Stadium crowd. The whiteout is, the last couple of whiteouts, in prime time, maybe not marquee competition that Penn State has faced. That's not the case with Oregon. 4-0. They got to come east again for the second time in 3 weeks. I don't know how fair that is to them, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, Max. Listening to James Franklin today, I'll start with you. What jumped out the most to you? What do you want to get into?
Yeah, there was a ton of stuff. James really, really informative during this week heading into a big game. I think one of the first things, Bob, and you've already written about it, is worthwhile. When scouting Oregon's offense, he shouted out a guy who hurt them quite a bit last year, who had taken an incredible leap this season.
Yeah.
Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end there. I'll let you talk about him a little bit more. But, as you said, we heard a little bit about freshmen.
Yeah.
See if there's any changes in the red, yellow, green lights. And kind of sounds like that's a no. All the names we've heard about are there. Chaz Coleman, Darius Dixon are still in the green. Yvonne Camaju's a yellow. Kobe Howard's a yellow. Alex Tash is kind of a leap into a yellow, I think. We heard more about him last week. And then Jameer Joseph, who had the great pick six against Villanova, is a yellow still too. So not a whole lot changing on that front there. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Some offensive notes, with as we, in our opinion, from the eye test, seems like the group has maybe struggled a little bit, but he had a lot of good things to say. So, yeah, very informative today.
Yeah, so like you said, he mentioned the Oregon tight end who had a chance to view him up close and personal. He was part of the Big Ten Media Days contingent for Oregon. He's a specimen, 6'3". Whatever they list him at, he might actually be bigger now. I think they list him at 6'3", 245. But I can't help. I know this is a different game because the Oregon offense is going to have to find a way to function in an atmosphere that is going to be very much against them functioning well. It's just not an easy adjustment to make. There's going to be some mistakes. But the reason I bring that up is it could be kind of a different game in a lot of different ways this time around, because when Penn State went to to the Big Ten title game to play Oregon in early December last year, it was pretty astounding to see. In that environment where weather wasn't a factor, the crowd was roaring, but it It wasn't a whiteout crowd. Oregon's offense, they started so fast against Penn State that Penn State was heroic, I thought, Max, in coming back from what was, I believe, a 28-10 deficit 20 minutes into the game. Oregon just went up and down the field. Penn State committed some penalties. They didn't start, they weren't razor sharp on offense until maybe the game got going into the late second and into the third quarter. But, what struck me is just, and James talked about it, this Jim Knowles defense, I think, is going to be a little bit better equipped to kind of handle what Oregon can do, which is it's not just their talent, it's their tempo. They do things, they want to do things at a dizzying pace to force a defense into conflict. I'm not sure how smoothly that's going to go at Beaver Stadium, but if Oregon is allowed to play fast, I think, number one, Penn State's defense is a little bit better equipped to handle it, but they could not handle it, I didn't think, at all last year. And Tez Johnson killed him, Max, but Sadiq scored the first 2 touchdowns for Oregon on throws from Dylan Gabriel, and he was a big factor in that game, and I think he's only gotten better. But I just think this is a different setup, and if Penn State can start fast, it really helps their chances. I'm really curious to see what Dan Lanning has planned to kind of handle this environment, because until you've played in it, you could say you're looking forward to it, but at the end of the game, unless you're a really good team, you're not really looking forward to it.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. Something interesting that came up when I was talking with Aaron Fentress of Ducks Confidential of OregonLive.com. Dante Moore is in his first year as the starting quarterback there. He started a couple games at UCLA, but that was it before he transferred, sat a year. In his first year as a starter there, and the offensive line has 4 new starters from last season, and all of them were transfers into the program that were not just getting reps last year. Like, they are all completely trying to gel together again. That's a factor when you look at the whiteout and what that can do to people. I'm glad you brought up the way that this Jim Knowles defense is gonna be able to challenge them, because that was your question that you asked James. And I loved the quote that James said. He flat out said, we didn't have enough tools in the tool belt last year to handle an offense that had Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart. I guess he didn't play in the Big Ten championship game, but Jordan James, Dylan Gabriel's legs, Sadiq, Terrence Ferguson, a lot of guys who could beat you. And basically said that boiled down to the fact that we played almost exclusively man coverage last year. Penn State didn't have a lot of zone in the scheme. And when they did play zone, sometimes they were caught out in wrong situations. I do think that was a little bit of a knock on Tom Allen that James Franklin was throwing out there.
I definitely think it was, especially since that Clemson defense is having some issues despite all their talent. I think he loves his man-to-man, but if you can't adjust, they're going to come get you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just think that Penn State is definitely better equipped, like you said, both from a personnel standpoint, because the secondary is really good, and as well from a Jim Knowles standpoint, who is able to disguise coverages, throw a guy like Moore off when he's playing in the whiteout. It's going to be interesting. And James Franklin was really, really transparent when he said, look, we didn't have a good enough approach to them last year, and it's a little bit different this year.
It is. I think starting fast is going to be the key to this game on both sides, because even though the Beaver Stadium crowd is going to be quiet or relatively quiet when Penn State's on offense, when I think about the first 3 games, they had their moments early in games, but they also didn't. There were also some moments that were not great early in games against inferior competition. And look, I know you can say what you want to say. It's hard to get up for that non-conference schedule, and I'm sure they were trying to do a lot of different things, and I'm sure they're holding some stuff back. But I guess we're going to know real early on Saturday night, Max, if they were kind of sitting on some things, but also, can this team just put it in 5th gear on offense after? I would say, if you had to evaluate their starts in the first 3 games, somewhere between a C and a B probably on offense, and there were some areas, but first game didn't really run the ball that well. Second game, Drew didn't play all that well. Third down issues in the second and third games. None of that lends itself to fast starts.
No, it doesn't at all. I do think that this secondary is starting to play really well.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they weren't tested in the first few weeks,
Yeah.
but I think a huge part of that is the discipline they've shown in the back end. They've really taken to this Jim Knowles defense. We keep hearing that the communication that Knowles is asking them to do keeps getting better, which is going to need to, because yes, the whiteout probably causes more problems for the Oregon offense,
Yeah.
but it also causes some problems for the Penn State
Correct.
defense that you don't really think about. If they can't hear Knowles on the in-helmet speaker, they might have to make some signals that'll change things. So you got to think about that. But this defense is in good shape. I think one thing that stood out to me that could easily go overlooked from James's press conference today, he said Zachy Wheatley, who's a guy we expected to come into the year and really dominate, said he took him a second to adjust to what Knowles was doing this year. And he feels like through 3 weeks, through the bye week, he's really starting to get there. So, I'm going to make my predictions official on Thursday with Johnny.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be shocked to see a Zachy Wheatley interception this week, Bob.
It could happen. I just know this. Oregon, it's a precision offense. They did not throw a pick in last year's Big Ten title game. Interceptions were kind of a storyline in that game, by the way. It was 2-0 and two costly interceptions as well. One set them up for a 1st and goal at the 1 in the second quarter, and the other one was the end of the game. He threw up, Drew threw up, I think, a 50-50 ball to Wallace, and the guy made a great play, but that was all she wrote. But Oregon, I think this guy's only got, I know they haven't played anyone either. 1 interception. Gabriel threw 4 touchdowns, no interceptions last year. We'll see if they can get 1 or 2. Their turnover margin is very good, +6. I think Oregon is +4. Another thing to watch for sure. I do like the point you made up that, if it's loud for the Oregon offense, it's going to be a little bit loud at times, depending on what they're trying to communicate on the Penn State defensive end. So that is definitely something to watch for. One thing I want to get to with you, it's something that Jim Knowles said a couple of days ago on his Zoom call. James brought up about some things. He was asked about the defense and some things that he learned about. And he said, well, 2 of the things we learned were, Chaz Coleman is a legit player. We're not quite sure. We thought he was, but he showed that. He mentioned Darius Dixon. At some point, Max, there's going to be a game where the game's hanging in the balance in the second half, and it could very well be on Saturday night. Mm-hmm. And I am more than a little. We talked about the secondary being a strength and the safeties. I do think if there is one thing that can get Penn State beat, it is a close game where they have to stop the run because of the way they play, because of some of the players they have. They are incredible athletes. But Jim Knowles brought it up last week. As great as Coleman has been, the next big thing for him is like what's going to happen when teams try and run at him. And, I don't know, other than maybe Florida International's running game, that there were many anxious moments for Penn State's defense having to defend a legit running game. I'm very curious about this moving forward. At some point, we're going to learn a lot more about Penn State's run defense in a close game.
You're absolutely right. I think, as we've talked about a lot, I think the depth up the middle at defensive tackle has really proven itself to be pretty stout, and we're a little bit less worried about that. But if Oregon's able to run some wide zones, if they're able to get out to the edge, I'm concerned about Penn State's performance beyond Dani Dennis Sutton and Zariah Fisher. It's very good news that those guys have stayed relatively healthy. Obviously, Dani looked like he was maybe cramping or something on the field. He's fine. He was in practice. He was taking it easy, but he's fine. Obviously, he's going to play. He's in good shape. Zane Durant's the same way. They're going to need them a lot this weekend. And you have to be in a position where you have both guys on the field to stop in a key drive. Mm-hmm. If for some reason they're not on the field, I have concerns about Penn State's edge defense because Chaz Coleman can really get after the passer. Mm-hmm. Malachi Williams the same way. James Franklin said today he's a guy who they feel a little bit better about him in the passing game versus the running game, and that's a problem. I mean, that was always kind of the question. We knew this was a talented group, but they just had to make the plays. And it's always, at least most of the time, it's easier for a young defensive end to come in and get after the passer than it is to be able to play against a Big Ten caliber rushing attack. Oregon's running offense is a little bit interesting this year, with the new offensive line, with no competition thus far. You don't necessarily have a back who is just, light years ahead of anybody else. It's interesting, but you bring up a great point that could absolutely be a spot of concern. And it's one that's, reared its head a little bit early in the season.
Yeah, has been without one of their runners the last 2 weeks. I know they've given a lot of work to a lot of guys, but I think one guy they were counting on, I think he's had a hamstring issue. We'll see what that's about. But it just struck me as we're talking about the bye week, Max, and we're talking about vulnerabilities and what could get Penn State in trouble. I think Oregon, if they decide they want to run the ball with their scheme, and Penn State's going to have to respect what they could do. More can run it a little bit, and they can also hurt them throwing the ball. I think that the Penn State's secondary is going to get tested. But when they have to go to Ohio State, that'll be that. But Max, the Indiana Hoosiers, buddy, they look a little bit more than a little bit formidable. They put it on the Brett Bielema's. That game was, that was something. But they are a team that can run the ball, and that is a coach that will absolutely. I know we're talking about down the road, but if they're healthy, they look like they are going to be a major player in the Big Ten race. I can't wait for that game after the Ohio State game. But look, there's no perfect teams. There just aren't. And Penn State's defense, I think, is plenty good enough. And eventually they're going to get tested. I am just very curious about Oregon in this atmosphere. But I think if Penn State does not start fast on offense, I think all bets are off. And that, to me, because that kind of dovetails into maybe some Drew Aller talk and some run game talk and who should be the running back talk. And also your question about, have you guys kind of watered down the offense a little bit? And there's some things you're kind of sitting on. So I just think the storylines are endless, but I do think there are plenty of roads or plenty of scenarios in which Oregon can not only threaten Penn State, but they can beat them.
Yeah, absolutely. Penn State hasn't done anything yet that makes us say, oh yeah, they're going to win this one easy.
Right.
It's just a matter of fact when, even though you've outscored non-conference opponents by 120 points, the offense has been slow. They're 77th in the country on third downs right now. That's been a major issue. They're not extending and not finishing drives. It's been a problem. But yeah, let's talk about the running backs, because James Franklin was asked, do you feel like you're getting everything you need out of Nick Singleton right now? Where's Kaytron at? Where's the overall running game at? And he kind of answered the question a little more about Kaytron Allen than Nick Singleton. And he said something that he's been alluding to all year, which is Kaytron Allen was healthy for the first time in his career for spring ball. He dropped a couple pounds, and Bob, I think you and I, as media corps members, we've seen it. He's not breaking that 67-yard run last season. He's just not doing it. I doubt he's touched 19 miles an hour on the field many other times in his career to this point. He looks really good physically, which is a great boost to what he was already able to do from a vision standpoint as a runner. Nick Singleton hasn't looked as good. James Franklin reprised his, I still think he just needs to let it rip, on the field on Saturdays. They're going to use Nick Singleton. Johnny and I talked about this last week. He's going to be needed. He will be a big piece. Eventually this season, he'll have one of his long runs. But they asked Nick to do a lot in the open field this offseason. They asked him to learn a lot. And they feel like he's just playing a little bit overthinking, a little bit tight right now. And it's pretty obvious because he hasn't been fantastic to start the year. He's been very okay, I would say. But we know Nick Singleton's better than that. We've seen him for a long time. Kaytron Allen is just an absolute workhorse right now and should be. And James Franklin said, look, the way he's playing, he's earning playing time. And that wasn't necessarily the case against Villanova, but I do anticipate that it will be against Oregon. I think kind of based on what we're hearing and his answer today, I think Kaytron's going to be the first back on the field. You're still going to see a fairly even split between them, but Kaytron has kind of made it. He's kind of made it undeniable. In classic Kaytron, verbiage, he's kicked down the door.
Yeah. So Nick, as I said, I got a question from somebody on social media about, Kaytron and Nick looking slow. I don't think that's quite fair to Nick. I think there's a difference between slow and just being a little bit hesitant or tentative. I think you can see him overthinking at times out there and pressing a little bit, and he's just not reacting. Like I thought his true freshman season and at times last year and, the 2023 season, when they just got him out into space and he just ran with it. He had 105 yards against Oregon last year on only 10 carries in the Big Ten title game. Then again, Penn State's offensive line absolutely demolished a pretty good Oregon front seven, running for 297 yards, 8.7 per carry. So that is also probably something that Oregon has probably spent the offseason wondering about coming in here and how it's going to be different. But as far as Nick and Kaytron, it was 2 weeks ago that James was talking about, I forget who he was asked about. It might have been Nick. And he said, there's a time and place for getting better and film study. But on Saturday, just let it rip. I have a list of a couple of players who have let it rip. And on offense, when I think of players who have let it rip, it's not the quarterback. It's not Nick yet. It's Kaytron has let it rip. I think he is just letting it rip now. I think Luke Reynolds is letting it rip too. Those are two guys I think that are letting it rip. Obviously, Deni Dennison is letting it rip. But you can tell people who are just very confident in their abilities out there and are like, look, just give me the ball or just try and single block me and see what happens. But there's too many people on Penn State, on a good Penn State team, I think, that are pressing. And the pressing needs to stop real soon because there are no more Nevadas on the schedule. There are no more Villanovas on the schedule. If you think too much in the majority of these Big Ten games, you're either going to be in a quote unquote dogfight or you're going to lose. So I think this is a veteran team. I do think you're going to see a better version of Penn State, but I am a little concerned about a couple of players that I shouldn't be concerned about.
Yep, I'm with you. Drew Aller is right up there with him. To talk about, James has asked, what did you learn about your offense through 3 weeks? What did you work on in the bye week? He said, we got to be a little bit better in tempo. We got to be better on third downs. And Bob, to your point, one thing that you've said a few times in this podcast is they got to start fast because they really haven't on offense. I mean, it was 10-0 against FCS Villanova with 2 minutes left in the first half. That's just not good enough, which is a common theme. And, I thought it was very interesting. James Franklin said that they do this every year, but they have their defensive staff and their offensive staff self-scout each other. Could definitely be, productive on the bye week for Drew Aller. I do think, I keep saying it. We've said it a lot. I think Drew plays best with his back against the wall. I think he'll play better this weekend. I don't think he'll be the reason they lose the game, but we never know what happens.
Yeah, and, I think we brought it up last week. So when you think about their slow starts, it's kind of, so if you remember to open the season, they get Nevada has the ball. The defense forces a turnover after they gain a couple of first downs. And Penn State does score on the possession, but they gummed them to death. They were very methodical, just not a lot of explosive plays. And that is where I think Nick Singleton being tentative shows up. But I will say this, Kaytron is definitely quicker. I think Luke Reynolds, believe it or not, is an explosive play guy just because he's quicker than people realize. And also he's awfully hard to bring down by one, once he gets, paired up with either a linebacker or a safety, good luck trying to bring him down. The other thing is I do think it's Devontae Ross has been a guy that early in the season, I think they've eased into it because he was dealing with something. If he's 100% and he's on the field for, 30 or 35 snaps and they do target him a couple of times, just his presence, I think, should make them a little bit more scary. And maybe it will open some things up for the running game. But that really wasn't there in the non-conference part of the schedule. He had the long touchdown against FIU. You could tell he's dangerous on punt returns, but I did get the sense that he wasn't quite 100%. And I think if he's 100% and they design some plays for him, I think it could be a much more explosive offense.
I'm with you. I think that point really goes to the question that I asked James today. And I kind of approached it. I said, look, a lot of fans, and he jabbed at me and he said, does that sometimes happen in the media too? And I said, yeah, it happens. And I said, there's an idea, a conception that maybe when you play 3 non-conference opponents that you end up outscoring by more than 100 points, you don't really have to run everything that you got. You don't have to show every trick you have up your sleeve. And I just said, Is that true? Is that a misconception? Where do you lie on that? And I think kind of as we've tried to say, like, yes, there may be something out there that they've been working on in fall camp that they didn't use. James Franklin said that. There's going to be stuff that you use in the Oregon game that you didn't use in the Villanova game. There's going to be stuff in the Villanova game that you didn't use in the FIU game. And it could be vice versa too, though. There could be stuff in the Villanova game that they don't end up doing in the Oregon game. A lot of it is matchup dependent. It's what they see on film. And yes, maybe there's some trick plays that they worked on all year that they didn't use. But the idea that their offense was vanilla through the first 3 weeks is maybe a little bit of a misconception, because if you boil it down, you're running your inside zone, your wide zone, your route trees, what have you. I mean, the offense at its core is the same concepts in every game. Sometimes they can formation a little bit differently based on what they see on film and in the matchup. But no, James Franklin does not think their offense was vanilla in the first 3 weeks. And on the other side, yes, there can be things that will show up against Oregon that they have not shown yet. So he was trying to kind of toe the line and say, while it's not like a complete misconception, it's not really fair to say our offense has just been vanilla to this point.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor Pena used as a running threat. That they certainly, he's more than capable, or at least he was against the first 3 teams. We saw plenty of that. I do think that Luke Reynolds' emergence is another thing. I think Penn State needed to see that, though. I think that's kind of why it happened, because they needed to be sure, hey, if we get this guy in space, like, he's looked really good the whole off season, we need to see it in a game. I think they've seen it. The guy's got a skill set that translates not only to the non-conference schedule, but also to the Big Ten schedule, and probably to the next level at some point if he continues to develop. So yeah, I think that when I think of things that maybe we haven't seen that we could see, and we only saw a little bit of it, I always go back to one thing. It's Nick Singleton as a receiver, whether it is on wheel routes. I think he had a huge touchdown catch down the middle against Oregon in the Big Ten title game. It was like a 22-yarder. It might have been their first touchdown, but if I'm Penn State, I'm not showing that. Like, why would I show that? Maybe they'll forget about him as a receiver. Penn State just missed with it. Drew Aller just missed with him a couple of times against Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, or that could have been a different result, especially early. But yeah, to me, if there's one thing, Max, I would say that I bet you they held back. It was probably Nick as a receiving threat, because I thought by the end of last year, considering what they had at wideout, once you got past Tyler Warren, I'm not so sure that Nick wasn't their second best option in the passing game, but there would be absolutely no reason, none, to show much of that against the Nevadas, FIUs, and the Villanovas. That's the one thing I think moving forward that you talk about getting Nick in space, and if it's not happening in the run game, it's easier to do it in the pass game.
Yeah, I think it kind of leads into a larger conversation and what we're talking about with the running backs and Nick versus Kaytron and everything. But I really felt in the beginning of last year, too, and especially in 2023 when Penn State was still led by Mike Yursich, and it made a shift once they fired him and had Sider and Powell calling the offense. There is not enough of like making it easy on Nick Singleton, of getting him out as a wide receiver running a bubble screen, getting him in space and saying, all right, beat one man and go. Like, it's just over his career, he hasn't been best at running between the tackles. Like, yes, if there's a huge crease, his speed means he can break it for a touchdown. But when you get him numbers on the outside, that's when he can really be special. And yeah, to your point, that hasn't really happened yet so far this year. There've been a couple of, sweep actions, outside zone, whatever you want to call it. And he's maybe missed some holes or not been patient enough on blocks. But him as a receiver could really be a difference maker. And maybe that's what they see against Oregon on film, that in this matchup, that's something they can exploit that they haven't done against other opponents yet. And good memory for you as well, because it was, in fact, exactly 22 yards on the touchdown against Oregon, and it was their first score. So I don't know when the last time you looked at the box score was.
Bob. I look at you. It's astounding. I need to get a life. I don't want to say I've memorized the Big Ten title game, but it's pretty close. It just helps that way when you're trying to get stuff done, and you're pretty sure it really helps kind of. But yes, I did. I've been looking at it a lot the whole bye week. Max, I just want to say, like, I still think on the Kaytron and Nick timeshare, and I've written about it. I think it should be 60-40. That's what I think it should be. But to go even a little bit further, I think about it in terms of not necessarily rushes, but touches. So, it could be 18 touches for Kaytron, where 16 are rushes and 2 are they throw them twice. But whereas Nick, it could be maybe 12 touches, where it's 6 or 7 carries, maybe 8 carries, but the rest are, let's target this guy in space as a receiver. And so I'm not necessarily saying that they're gonna devalue Nick as a weapon. I think they can enhance his value as a weapon, but that enhancement might come as a receiver. But I'm on board with 60-40 until I could see it another way. And I think that actually it would work for both of them. I mean, I think Kaytron gets stronger the more he gets the ball. He gets in rhythm, and then he starts punishing people. And I think Nick can do that, but I think where Nick's value is and at the next level, it's, he can run the ball, but he can also throw it to him 4 or 5 times, and one of those times he catches the ball, it's probably going to be an explosive play.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you wholeheartedly. We saw it against Oregon last year, and I think that it could definitely be a factor this year. I'm also curious, I think Penn State's offensive line has consistently gotten better through those 3 weeks to start this year. I think they're starting to gel, and they really crushed Oregon last year with what was probably a better front seven than the Ducks have this year. So I think the only.
I mean, if you look at I'll tell you what, he keeps, and the guy is a great player. Last year I talked to some Penn State players, and you look at the box score from last year's Big Ten title game. Number 10 isn't in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he never played the game. Some Penn State players talked about that. Derek Harmon's a good player. He showed up in that game, but there were some really good front seven players in that game. That Penn State, that offensive line and those tight ends, they stayed with it. They got after them, and by the third quarter, had Oregon not started the way that they did, I can't really say. By the third quarter, I can't really say for sure that the Ducks were the better team, but to their credit, they started fast. I think it's going to be a major storyline. Again, if Penn State doesn't start fast, the whiteout atmosphere is amazing, but it's only so much you can do if you fall behind an Oregon team by 14 points or more.
Yeah. You got to start fast, but I do absolutely think that the opportunity is there for Penn State this weekend. Yeah. I think up front, I do still anticipate that this offensive line should dominate in the trenches.
All right, Max, I promised you off air that we wouldn't talk for 30 plus minutes, and we're right at 35 minutes now. So just like my Dallas Cowboys, I have disappointed again in as far as our time frame, but it was a good 35-minute chat. I think you and Johnny are going to do a podcast on Thursday. You had already referenced the cross-potting with Oregon Live, something to look out for. Who knows what else is coming? The week's going to go by pretty quickly. To our Oregon beat writers that we're getting to know, I just want to wish them safe travels, because to go from Oregon to State College, I mean,
it's a long one.
That's going to be a long one. I hope everything goes well for those guys, but I'm looking forward to the game. Anything else you're working on this week you want to alert the fans to before we get out of here?
I do want to give a shout out from this weekend, Bob. You did a lot of talk about Luke Reynolds. I posted a long story on him, kind of a profile of his journey and how he got here to being Penn State's #1 option at tight end. And a lot of thanks to his family and his high school coach over at Chester Academy, who gave me a lot of time and were very friendly. And that was a fun story. So if you haven't read that yet, go check it out. And Bob, I think we got a lot of stuff coming this week between all of us. So, yeah.
All right. So it is now 2:10 p.m. It is Penn State Whiteout Week. It's Whiteout Monday ahead of Whiteout Saturday night. And we still have a lot to get to. So for Max Ralph, I'm Bob Flounders. We'll have more podcasts, more stories, and we're going to have some game predictions, which I honestly, Max, I am still not sure which, as far as the kind of game we're going to see and who I'm going to pick. The line's only 3. I thought it'd be a little bit more, but Oregon is a dangerous team. So, Max, we will be busy all week. So, for everyone who watched and listened, please continue to do so. We got more coming, and make sure you enjoy, Penn State fans, your whiteout week. Oregon is coming soon, and I hope Penn State's ready.